welcome to another episode of Just For More Fix. This is James. With me in this episode is Lacey.
Hey.
You can find us online at justformorefix.com or on Twitter at justformorefix. If you like us, you can support us at Patreon, and you can give us a rating and review at iTunes or wherever you find us at. In this episode, we're going to speculate about V5. And now, it's time to get our gaming fix.
I'm Jamie, aka Scumboy.
I'm Andrew Walsh, aka Bat Phantom.
I'm Kevin, aka Neon Nazgul from the Operation Bug Podcast.
A proud member of the Gonna Geek Network.
Just like the show you're listening to now.
The opinions expressed are those of each individual host.
Check out all the podcasts at GonnaGeekNetwork.com.
And get ready because geekiness begins in 3, 2,
1.
Welcome to that episode of Just For More Fix. Only one quick announcement is that, just to mention again, we will be at Game in Terre Haute on the 21st. I posted the event to our Facebook page, although something about the attachment didn't want to show up or something. I'm not sure why or how or what. But so if you guys are in the Terre Haute area and you would like to come out and game with us, we'll be running some games at Game on the 21st of July from 5 to 9. For those of you that are vampire fans, and if you're listening to us, hopefully you are, V5, 5th edition Vampire the Masquerade, is going to be releasing at Gen Con, so I'm super excited for that. There were not many games this year that I was excited to see come out, but I found out they're going to be releasing it at Gen Con, and I'm super stoked for it. And they're also releasing a preview of part of the book with some of the stuff about clans and the new storyline and whatever. And I believe that is coming out at the end of this week. So after this episode drops, it should be the Friday following that. So I thought it might be fun to do something we haven't done before and just completely speculate as to what we think might be there or might not, or what we hope is there and what we hope is not.
Completely aside from book and system, what I really hope is that is at Gen Con, that did not want to come out, is a Onyx Path Publishing sponsored Vampire the Masquerade ball, because I feel like if that doesn't happen, there's a huge opportunity that's being missed.
True story. They've done the Masquerade Ball a couple different events that they've had. It'd be very cool to have it at Gen Con too.
This is for like the V5 release. This is like the main event.
That is true. I have to check that out. I'm not sure. I don't think I saw any events like that on the Gen Con thing.
They should have a Masquerade Ball launch party.
It's true. It's true. They should get on that
type thingy.
Right on. So, where do you want to start with this? Is it kind of
Is there anything that you've seen so far that you're pleased or not pleased with?
Okay. So not all of this is entirely in the dark, because me and Lacey both at Gen Con last year played the V5 adventure that was ran by White Wolf there. And so focusing on what we know is there.
Well, none of that was finalized necessarily. There was even still some system components that were being worked out. So,
but I'm almost certain that the hunger mechanic is still going to be in it,
which is amazing.
That is by far the best thing about the game that I have seen so far. And if there is something that tops that, this will be the best game ever, right? Because that's the most amazing mechanic ever. So whenever you make any roll, you have your hungers rated from 1 to 5, and you add that many dice. Or I'm sorry, let's just say your dice pool is 6 dice, okay? No matter what the test is, it's 6 dice. If you have on a scale of 1 to 5, right, and your hunger is always at least at 1, if your hunger is 2 of those dice get changed out for a different color, right? And they will be your hunger dice. And if they roll 1s, then your hunger goes up by that many, right? And it makes every choice you make relevant for whether you really want to push it, because the beast is always there. And I think it's a really cool way to make you just feel the pressure of being a vampire, and that you could, in fact, at any moment, just lose it.
It took it from just a concept that should have been in the back of your mind being role-played the entire time and pushed on by your storyteller to something that is actually mechanically induced.
And it's very visceral.
Yes.
Because I had a 4 hunger when I was doing something with my Nosferatu, and I was just like dreading as I was exchanging the dice out for 4 red dice. That was just terrible. And it was a great but terrible feeling. And it makes hunger totally relevant to everything you do. And I think it probably is the best improvement to Vampire, period. Right. Thematically, it crosses everything, whether you're a good guy or a bad guy or what clan or any of that stuff, generation, any of it.
So that is awesome. They did release some of the clan portraits, I guess you want to call them, some of the artwork for each clan.
Oh yeah.
I wasn't really impressed. I mean, they were nice, but I don't know if it's just nostalgia. Like, I like the old style art, and I see that they wanted to make a change, but I don't really like the realistic looking photos, because it's more like this is one person, and it's not like something that I can see transforming into whoever I need it to be.
I see.
Like, it's
so
too specific.
Yeah, it's an individual as opposed to a concept or something.
Yeah.
I can see that. I will say that that was something I was going to mention.
They are well done.
Yeah.
It's just not what I care for.
Right. Well, the artwork from the original Vampire series, just Vampire the Masquerade, not the Requiem, is so iconic. And it's so very 90s, and it's just so very White Wolf and vampire, right? I mean, it's like it's a thing unto itself. It's almost like its own style.
Yeah, and I know it's a new era and all that, so I get it. But
well, I also think in some of the things, the reason why some of the stuff that's in 5th edition D&D is there, because you have to call back to what D&D is, and I think Vampire should do that as well, because you want to bring in new fans, but you also want to call back to the history and all that stuff, and part of that is those iconic styles and art and all that stuff. Now, I'm not saying it all has to be that way, but if there is none of it in there, I will be very disappointed. So I hope, while I don't have a problem with the newer style artwork where it's more photos with effects laid over them and filters and stuff, they look nice and they're well done, but I want to evoke that feeling of Vampire the Masquerade. I want that 90s artwork. It's just so iconic, and I like it. I like that style. I guess if there's new stuff in there of a different style, I'm not like morally opposed to it, right? But I want to feel and see some of that older style iconic artwork. I 100% agree with that. So maybe a little of both, right?
Well, and everything I've seen so far, the character portraits in the old book too are kind of like, this is the clan at their best. So I haven't seen any of the darker work that gets juxtapositioned with that.
Right.
Where you see, here's a picture of the beast. Now here's a picture of the vampire when they have basically all there together. So it's kind of neat to see the changes that come across in the artwork that's selected. But
right on.
So hopefully we'll see some of the darker, more gruesome things as well. I'm sure that we will. So.
Yeah, oh yeah. I mean, it is White Wolf, right? So is there anything else from the stuff that has actually been put out and the game that we played that you liked and are glad that it's there?
I don't remember that much being terribly different. Like, everything else in the version that we played was very, very much similar.
So there were 2 different playtests that were released, and one of them was still strength, dex, stamina, like your attributes were broken out in 3s, right? And then there was another playtest that was out before that we had that was, you had just a rating in physical, social, mental, and then you picked a specialty and you got 1 extra die in that. And I really liked that because
that too.
It made the mechanics a little cleaner. And then instead of having one that you just sort of threw away, you had one that you picked that this is what I'm good at, right? And I kind of like the way that works better, I guess.
I would really like to see some simplification with the skills as well. Not just the core attributes, but do we really need 13 things in each column?
True.
Like, there's got to be something we can trim there. And
right.
there's always, why not have overarching broad categories, and then you can add specialties. Like, specialties have always been a thing, and nobody has ever felt the need to take them because it costs so much experience when there's so many skills that you don't have covered. So it's just something that's not getting used.
And Requiem did pare them down some, so it'll be interesting to see whether they go with more of a Requiem style list or whether they go with the Masquerade style list, I guess. But I understand what you're saying there. It does get to be a little much sometimes, especially when you're trying to divvy up points and dots and whatever and trying to be effective. And most of what we saw in terms of disciplines and powers were pretty close to what we were already used to. I will say they fixed Obfuscate 1. It was different that it was the Obfuscate from Requiem where you could hide something on you.
Much more useful.
Yeah, because hide behind stick is really kind of terrible. I never cared for that, but whatever. I have to say, I had a great time playing the playtest, the adventure we played at Gen Con last year. It was a good adventure. The guy that ran it for us, our storyteller, did a good job. We had a pretty good table of people with us playing. So I enjoyed it. And there was a lot of people there that were old time vampires that could remember some of the older stuff, and that's why they were there, right? They wanted that old Vampire the Masquerade feel. So why don't we shift gears then away from what we know is there and just go crazy with speculation? And is there anything that you don't want to see in it?
Oh, I feel like I already said there's just too much shit on that piece of paper, and there's no reason they can't trim it down. I mean, really though, because when you're thinking about vampire, the things that come to mind for me are power and influence.
Mm-hmm.
Your core attributes have always been way more relevant than your skills, and your actual like vampire disciplines.
Mm-hmm.
And so everything that's not those things, I feel like could be pared down. The other thing is the roads. To me, I feel like there's just too much there. The actual struggle with humanity versus vampire is the story that I feel like is the most interesting, and the rest of that is kind of extra fluff.
Right.
It's just not as interesting of a story as the humanity struggle.
Right. Now, see, this is something where it's interesting because a lot of the roads I like in the Dark Ages sense of things, because I like Dark Ages being that the vampires are able to do more and get away with more because it's the Dark Ages and whatever. So there's a very different feel to that game. Now, when it comes to modern times, I like it being more about humanity and the personal struggle against your beast and what have you lost and becoming a monster. So I totally am on board with you right there. I do think, though, that as the game went on, they had to keep making... They kept making more and more things. So then as the game grows and then there's more and more stuff, and then, hey, let's add this cool thing. And next thing you know, these 15 things are supposed to be rare, but they're in everybody's game now because you bought the books and you want to use them. And I get it. It's exciting and it's cool. So I like the idea a lot of getting back to basics of what made Vampire the great game it was when it very first, I mean, it continues to be a great game. So I don't want to say that, but when it came out, it was mind-blowing of how different it was from everything else that was out there. And I know in some of their keynote speeches, the guys behind the game want to have that impact again, and I really, really hope that they do. So I think one of the ways to do that, though, is to get back to the foundations of what Vampire is at the beginning of things, which is what you're talking about. And I also think it's interesting what they've kind of mentioned doing, that the Camarilla is going to kind of become more of this secret sect, and everyone is going to broadly speaking be an anarch. And then there's these sort of extreme elders that are the actual Camarilla that are pulling the strings to things like far behind everything. I think it's a really cool improvement because the Camarilla Sabbat dynamic has always been very cool, but there needed to be something larger and more sinister in the Camarilla. And they had the Council of Seven, but it just never had that feel.
Well, I really hope with that, in keeping with that idea, that there's more nuance apparent with the Sabbat in the core books without digging too far into the weeds. You know, there's
Really?
more than just the big bad boogeyman. Yeah, because I always thought the Sabbat was fascinating once you actually got to play a Sabbat game with they have the same sort of social hierarchy that's happening. And if you're playing anarchs anyway, why would you just assume that they're bad and evil? That's sort of like Camarilla propaganda that's being thrown at you. So I would think that would lend itself to giving some more exploration on both sides of the fence, you know what I mean?
See, I don't know. I was kind of hoping they would actually go back to the very first edition of Vampire style Sabbat, where you couldn't play them as characters. They're just complete psychopath monsters, basically. Because I like the idea of there being this monster that you cannot reason with that is just going to come to devour you. Now, that said, part of the problem that I have always had with White Wolf and the World of Darkness is that there are two general strong political sides in all of their games, right? Camarilla Sabbat or Technocracy and the Traditions or whatever, right? And I never really saw a good way how the Camarilla would beat the Sabbat when the Sabbat doesn't have to abide by these rules. And that is one of the things that I kind of struggled with in running the game and playing the game. So I hope that they find a way to manage that to where maybe the Sabbat is very, very small. Or maybe they change them into some kind of more of a sinister evil cabal than the outright overt monstrous style archetype thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. I'm kind of torn either way.
I think you can still have monsters in the darkness. Like maybe there are some things that have slid so far past time and reason that they are just wandering monsters.
Right.
But it can be something that is separate from, you could have this thing that used to be Camarilla or used to be Sabbat in an age that time is forgotten. And now you have this almost sort of like vampire zombie creature.
Right. I'm excited to see because I see merits on both sides of it, right? And they there's a million possibilities of what it could end up being, so it could be something that I haven't even considered yet. But on one hand, I really like that first edition just terror of the actual boogeyman, because that's how they were painted in that. It was that they're just complete brutes and they don't care, and they're just going to come wreck everything. And I liked that as a boogeyman feature, but at the same time, when you try and reconcile that and keep it a more realistic and less fantastical game, I don't see how you are able to manage that struggle and not have them overwhelm everything. So maybe the more sinister, dark cult style of Sabbat might work better in that kind of a case. I don't know. So is there anything else political wise in terms of sects that you think you would like to see or not see? Like what about we didn't even mention the Independents or whatever, but
I never liked the Giovanni that much anyway, if we're being honest. When you say Independence, it's the first one that comes to mind, but they just don't. I mean, I guess they make sense as independents because they just don't fit with anything else. I don't know. I secretly wanted to play something that was either a Tremere or a Wraith, and so I decided to be Giovanni.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I really wanted to play a Wraith game, and, well, I kind of made a Giovanni instead because it's vampire. That's a fair... okay. There are some that
I don't know.
fit.
Ghost manipulation just doesn't seem to mesh with the rest of what's going on. Like, you can make it work, sure, but it...
Well, thematically, it is a little bit of a departure from the rest of the vampire stuff, I agree. But I like the idea of there being independent clans that are sort of these...
No, I always like the Samedi. Like, they're a fascinating thing. And I don't know, not a lot of people include them in their game. And that's kind of more something that you've done. But they're an interesting
Absolutely.
thing.
But like
what are some of the other...
So there's the followers of Set, and I have always liked them as a concept because the honey-tongued salesman that has whatever it is that you need, I think is a really fun archetype to play with in a game that's about influence and social standing. But I like them as an idea and an archetype, but when it comes to how Set fits into the actual mythology of things, I think it gets a little complicated.
I always see them now, not so much then, but as American gods, and there's Ibis and Jackal.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I sort of picture that being what a follower of Set would be like, trying to blend in like a regular kind of American world.
So I think they're cool, but when you get into the mythology of it, that's where it kind of starts to lose me. So I like what they represent and what they are, but when you get into the weeds and some of the meta story and stuff, that's where I start to get it gets a little difficult for me sometimes because...
I think you could very easily pull in kind of what Anne Rice has going on in Queen of the Damned, where the actual mythology, maybe there's one school of thought where it starts with Cain and it's all biblical, but there's another school of thought where it starts with the Egyptian goddesses and gods, and then you have this kind of separate path,
push
basically.
And pull. Right, yeah. So I don't know, like I like the idea in that there's not necessarily like what you're talking where there could be more than one history and no one really knows the source of it. As the timeline progressed and then they started to do Gehenna, it was like now we have to start to reconcile these things. So how does Set fit into all this kind of stuff, right? Mm-hmm. So I say this, and it sounds like I'm being overly critical, but I loved it. I liked Gehenna. I ran it. I had a great time.
Well, and Gehenna is 100% optional.
Yeah. Well, that's what's interesting is some of the stuff that what I understand is that the timeline is going to advance after Gehenna. So there was some large event that happens that cripples the vampires, and then the storyline is going to continue, and that's what V5 is going to be. So I think there's going to be much less vampires. So I think the standard was in Masquerade, like one vampire per 5,000 people. So it may even go lower than that, maybe like one per 10,000 or something, which would be even cooler to shrink it down, because I always liked in games where even in a larger city, there might be 100 vampires total. And I like the idea that since you can't kill them outright, like in an Apocalypse World fashion, name every NPC, right? Mm-hmm. That way there wasn't just a nameless Nosferatu. It didn't matter who he was. Everybody was important and everybody mattered and everybody had a name. It sort of changes things that way. So, but outside of Independence, I hope, and I know you never really got too deep into the meta of everything with the Incarnu and the Black Hand and all that stuff. We had a little bit of it in our games, but I hope at least at the beginning of this that they thin all that out, because that is one of the things that kept a lot of new players from coming into World of Darkness because of them being intimidated by it. So you might come into a new...
I mean, you've got the Sabbat and you barely get a handle on that. Now there's werewolves and now there's Giovanni and now, oh, hey, by the way, there's the Black Hand, but also, hey, Bali, and then... I'm like, my head is spinning. What are all these
very
things?
True. The thing is, though, is that didn't happen all at once. And for those of us that started at the beginning of things, it came a piece at a time, right? But if you're just now getting into it or trying to start a new group where you have no one has any vampire experience, it's a huge mountain to climb. And I've always said, just don't involve it, or involve as much as you want or as little. It doesn't matter. It's your game. Make it for your table. But I do kind of like the idea that they may be hitting the reset button with this and saying the Black Hand, the Incarnu, all that stuff. It was very cool, but now it's sort of gone. They, maybe they still exist, maybe they don't. You can leave it open-ended and decide for yourselves, but they're not going to be part of the core of what we're making right now. And I like the idea of that, in that it sort of wipes the slate clean creatively, so that if you want to take the best parts from those things, you can, but at the same time, you don't have to draw that in if you don't want to. So maybe cleaning it up a little bit, because there was a lot there. I mean, it's a ton. There's so many books. It's just crazy. So, and most of them were good. The vast majority of them were good. I enjoyed, they had at the time, and even still today, they have some of the best RPG writers making Vampire. That's why it signed so well and was so individual when it came out initially. So, all right. So as far as Cam goes, because we know the Camarilla stuff is coming out. Those are the first couple books, right? So the Anarchs and that kind of stuff. So are there anything about the Camarilla clans? And when I say Camarilla clans, it's the ones that are currently in the Camarilla that we know of, right? Is there anything that you would like to see changed or eliminated or added to it?
I feel like I don't want to lose the Tremere. Right. But again, that's an area where I feel like there could be a lot of chopping. The number of paths of thaumaturgy is just utter nonsense. Right. And there's no real answer to it in other clans that exist in the Camarilla. Mm-hmm. And the Tremere have 2 other paths, and thaumaturgy could still be a thing, but maybe each dot could have an ability like everything else. And
right. Or maybe you could go where you have the Path of Blood, right? And that's thaumaturgy. And then there are a ton of rituals that you can get. And that might be, instead of it being 8,000 disciplines from 1 to 5. I agree.
Too much.
I agree.
And to me, it's too much of a leap to say this clan has been around thousands of years less than every other clan, and yet somehow they've managed to become broke-ass sorcerers in that amount of time. And I don't know, Clan Ventru is still just really good at dominating. We haven't advanced beyond that, guys.
It's true. That is kind of silly. But I mean, to be fair, they were wizards. But I agree with your point. It's a fair point. I'm just saying. But so one thing for me that I really hope that they do is the Nosferatu thing, where they sort of had this unspoken thing where they kind of got along across sect because they were Nosferatu. I hope it goes away, because I think it changes the dynamic of everything. And it's this unspoken thing that people knew about, but no one talked about. And I thought it kind of took away from things. And I like the idea of loyalties being challenged, but when it was so completely one-sided, it just sort of takes something away from the game. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it more than just giving them something extra, because I don't care so much about them having extra contacts and access to information. That part was fine, but it gave them a reason to work closely together and not against each other that no other clan really had.
And if they're supposed to be these monsters and breaking the masquerade and all this kind of stuff, it's when your political dynamics are so drastically far apart, I don't see how you make that, how you reconcile that. You know what I'm saying? Your clan loyalty shouldn't necessarily be higher than your sect loyalty in a sense. So the other one that I have is Malkavians. I really, really like Malkavians, but I really hope that, and I don't know what the solution is, but they find a way to, in terms of when you make your character and you put it together and you're playing it, that they have a way to, I don't know if enforce is the right word, but encourage you to make a character who is not just an insanity with some dots.
Well, because I think probably the easiest way to do that, and it would take 2 seconds and make perfect sense, is that in this madness is contained within the blood, but it takes time to manifest. So you make a regular, normal character, maybe even make an old school Malkavian that has Auspex, Obfuscate, Dominate.
Right.
And at some point, when your character enters their first frenzy or something to that effect, then all of a sudden this insanity has manifested.
Right.
And then maybe the amount of control you have over that level of insanity can be based on the amount of willpower you have tapped or not. Mm-hmm. I think that would be an interesting way to make it more dynamic in a way that the hunger sort of is.
Well, then also you could draw in what triggered your frenzy could be drawn in as part of your insanity. So whether that was a loss of control because of fear or because of anger could largely dictate that. Did you feel like you were insulted unjustly and that's why you frenzied? And especially with the new hunger rolls, it's much more likely to happen in a drastically different situation other than fear frenzy from fire or anger frenzy because of something that somebody said, right? It could just be anything because you made a roll. It could be like trying to hide in the shadows and making your stealth roll and, time to frenzy, right? It could be anything. So that could lead to some really interesting potential things if they kind of incorporated that. Would be very interesting.
And it would add an instant sort of backstory to the derangement that you have, which would make it much more relevant and memorable for you.
Right. It's just my biggest problem, maybe this is because I saw it happen a lot at LARP, but a lot of Malkavians become caricatures of their insanity, which is really kind of boring. And that's the other reason I like the idea of having it in flux. Oh, right.
There's no reason why, if you're based on self-control or willpower or whatever, that you couldn't have a better handle on this thing. Like, it would always be present, sure. But in times of stress, when you're under pressure and these things are tapped and you don't have the same kind of reserves, then all of a sudden it starts to manifest more and more to the point where it's no longer in your control.
Because my thing was, it's sort of, if you had like a Venn diagram with three things, right, for insanities, it was either comical and ridiculous is at one end of it. The other end is I'm just a monster and I destroy things. And at the other end, it's not relevant. And it barely ever becomes relevant because I've made it in such a way to where I can have dementation and auspex and obfuscate, but not have to deal with an insanity. And sort of very rarely do you ever see the three of those things combined together to make a really interesting Malkavian. That's more than just an insanity. It would be neat if
they could change dementation in such a way and meld it with dominate, so that when you have, like, on a spectrum or whatever, so when you're operating in this capacity, it acts like dominate, and as you start to lose, like, it slips into dementation.
That would be crazy. That would be fun. But yeah, could totally be. Right on. Do you have anything else about clans?
I would like to see more from Clan Gangrel.
That's where I was just going to go.
I've always liked Clan Gangrel. I don't know for what reason, because I guess it's just because they're the ones out there that like, well, I am a beast. This is what is happening, guys. But they're pegged as this solo lone wolf creature, which I think is interesting because they were always kind of the vampire nod to werewolf.
Right.
And werewolves are such a pack creature. And there's never been, well, I'm sure there has been, but in games we've played, there's never been like a really strong, like, here's 6 Clan Gangrel and this is how we roll, but they're always like super physically powerful, but they don't ever seem to really have any aspirations. It's like it's built into the clan design to have no aspirations to political
influence. That could
influence.
Be a fun game though, where you had your coterie was largely Gangrel or entirely Gangrel, and it was more of like a werewolf pack as opposed to a traditional coterie. That could be an interesting game to play through.
Like the libertarians of Camarilla. Like, well, then why are you guys here?
Yeah, why don't you guys go bugger off into the forest somewhere? Fine, we will. Right. Yeah, I agree. What I was going to say is that when it comes to Gangrel, it seems like in the storyline, it was kind of like, and it made sense that they were kind of Camarilla for a while, and no, now we're not, and now we are. And it made sense in the storyline, but in terms of the way the game worked, when you sit down to play, it was like, well, what era are we playing in? So are Gangrel part of the Camarilla? Can I make a Cam Gangrel now, or are we not part of that? And then the way the power dynamic works for the clan and the city, if they are or not.
But I mean, if Camarilla is not going to be such a big deal, like, I could certainly see where Gangrel would be a dominant force in a post-Gehenna anarchist world.
This is very true. Yeah, absolutely. So
this could be their moment.
Could totally be right. So it's interesting to see how it's going to work, because a lot of the stuff will be dictated by what the actual role of the Camarilla is and what the anarchs actually are, whether they're more of this listless sort of ragtag bunch of people that didn't really have a direction, right? Or if they are more organized now, not fully like the Camarilla, but something close to it, and then the Camarilla is more sinister.
Like, how organized can you get and still be an anarchist?
Well, I think there's some problem in the language there, in that it may have to sort of change people's minds of what an anarch is for vampire. You know what I mean? So that they're more.
Well, I kind of liked the Requiem sort of nod to.
Oh, with the Carthage? No, not Carthage.
Carthians?
Carthians, yes.
Is that what it is?
Yes, it is Carthian.
Is it right?
We are not Requiem players. No, I will say I prefer Old World of Darkness.
I liked
but,
that change in
yes.
Requiem.
I
didn't like most other things. I didn't like the Lancia.
Oh, really?
No, I didn't like the juxtaposition between them. That's the second time I've used this word in this podcast. This word between them and the Circle of the Crone.
Oh, okay.
Like I just didn't want that much religiosity in what I was doing. I prefer the politics.
I agree, but I do think it's an interesting thing because there's always been this sort of, I don't know what you want to say, Abrahamic religion thing with Jesus and Cain and all that kind of stuff and how you trace it. And I thought I like the idea of the zealotry of the Sanctified. I think it's just fun and compelling and makes for interesting stories, and they make great villains, and you have this uncompromising
fun, but in a short-lived way.
I agree. And it was a perfect example.
It's not something I want to play for a year.
Well, our LARP characters that we had that were Sanctified were a perfect example of a force that was hard to reckon with, but was very clearly, once we established power, these are the bad guys. How do you deal with them? And they worked well for that. But at a certain point, it did become kind of redundant and boring. Now, I will say, as far as Requiem goes, like I mentioned, we weren't big Requiem players, and I wasn't personally the hugest fan of it, but there were some great improvements with it. And having the
simplified die roll was, I didn't like it, kind of broke the system, but I liked not having to roll a whole handful of dice.
It was a little cleaner, but I didn't like how the difficulty was higher because then you're rolling 10 dice and you might only get 2 successes. And I thought this is a little crazy here. I thought sometimes it was a little easy in regular World of Darkness, right? As opposed to Requiem, Masquerade or whatever. And so I understand the argument, but I think it went too far the other way.
Too, was really, I think, the big thing. Like, if you had started with that, maybe I wouldn't be so upset about it. But now, like, when I'm used to being a baller and then you change gears on me like that, and I'm like, I can't even do anything.
I bought 6 points in this and I can't do it. But what I did like about it the most was the way they made your political affiliation much, much more relevant. So as opposed to in Masquerade, it was all about clan loyalty. And this, it was more about aligning yourself politically, which makes a little bit more sense. So I hope that maybe whether it's the Anarchs of the Camarilla, maybe they have sort of like sects within inside them that you sort of have, like, for lack of a better term, a political party that you belong to inside the Anarchs, right? And you can kind of bicker back and forth about the way you think Anarchs should be run, but when it comes time to bump up against a Sabbat, then we're all on the same page. You know what I'm saying? I hope that they incorporate that in some way, but if they don't, it won't be a deal breaker for me. To be honest, I'm not sure there will be a deal breaker for me. If they sparkle, that might be a deal breaker for me. But
that's awe, isn't it?
Well, when there's sparkle in the sunlight is what I'm trying to say. Okay. Not like awe or entrancement or majesty. Yeah, exactly. I guess that's most of the Camarilla stuff. I don't like discipline-wise. There's a lot that could be done or not done, whatever. I think the thaumaturgy thing you mentioned was totally relevant. You could make the same argument about necromancy. Other than that, though, I'm
fine with that. Yeah, I already said I don't like Giovanni anyway.
Well, yeah. Well, I'm just saying if you paired the necromancy down into one thing. I really don't have too much of a problem with any of the way the disciplines have worked. I do agree that some of them don't like slide forwards or backwards into tabletop and LARP evenly, because some of them don't make sense the way they would work in a LARP game. You just can't physically do it that way because of logistics and whatever. But, I don't really have too much. I mean, like, when you get into the weeds about things, like some of the smaller clans and bloodlines and stuff, it gets a little complicated. But why don't we shift to Sabbat then a little bit? I know that they don't have anything released about what their plan is for Sabbat, but I have heard some rumblings that it might be going to first edition.
I already told you what I wanted from Sabbat.
But what about like the clan stuff? Do you hope that there are clans that are only Sabbat and clans that are only Cam, or do you just think that it should be more any clan and you decide your political affiliation? More Requiem style, I guess.
I like the division. I like the division.
Yeah, like with the Tzimisce only being.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, to be fair, there is no more Sabbat power than vicissitude. I mean, come on, right?
I don't know. The Salubri are pretty cool too.
Oh, well, but
now, like, a healer Salubri would fit quite well into the. Really, either one could, honestly, but it's harder to maintain the Masquerade when you have another eye in the middle of your forehead. True. It's just like Tzimisce. Like, they don't want to walk around looking like regular humans. Like, you very clearly don't belong.
Right.
And Cappadocians look like death, and they don't have obfuscate, so...
Makes that a little hard, right?
I mean, so they were just kind of the more monstrous things. I suppose there isn't any express reason why they couldn't be. The whole idea of Clan Tzimisce just doesn't fit, though, because they're not even on... I suppose if you made them be on a humanity track, You could, but it almost
Yeah.
really doesn't make sense for them.
True. Like you mentioned, your criticism of Road was entirely irrelevant, but the only problem is that if you don't use roads, then it sort of makes some of these character concepts and clans to where they're unplayable. Now, the argument could be made that they are so far from anything representing humanity that maybe they shouldn't be playable in that sort of a sense. But part of the awesome of World of Darkness and Vampire is that Tzimisce are just wicked cool.
I don't know that they make great NPCs.
Yeah.
But getting to play them is neat.
Yeah,
it is
it is
neat.
fun.
And I think it's valuable to be able to play just as a bot game, just so that every once in a while you can dabble in the darkness and get to play around with these other things that you don't always get to see. But yeah, I don't know. There are some things that just don't make sense to be in the Camarilla. But again, if you have an anarchist state, then I think it's certainly possible that some of those things could seep over into the middle ground for sure.
And there's nothing to say that just because that you're a Tzimisce or a Lasombra or whatever, that you would be hopelessly loyal to the Sabbat.
Yeah. Well, and I also feel like Camarilla and Sabbat comes with a lot of tradition and elder vampires in that. And so I think that even more than those characters wouldn't join them is that they would not be allowed.
Oh, right.
Like there's this prejudice within the Camarilla. Oh, we can't have a Salubri here.
Right.
We can't have a Tremere anti-tribu.
Right.
That's not allowed.
Right.
But if you're an anarchist, yeah,
Sort
sure.
of, yeah, whatever
you
it
don't
goes.
like what's going on in the Sabbat? Come on over to Team Anarchist.
Right.
You know what's
and
going
to
on
be
in
fair,
Cam?
as after Requiem came out, our Anarchs got more Carthian, I would say. And I really like the idea of that. And I think that's sort of in line with what you're talking about, where they're more open and welcoming because we're not these two ancient organizations, right, that have all this power to wield. We need numbers and we need people that are motivated to butt up against these things.
And that makes the most sense to me, too, for them being able to garner and hold power, because now they're blending all of these different abilities from these groups that have just classically been separated.
Right. Very cool. Now, one independent that I know a lot of people will be upset if we didn't mention is Assamites. Do you have any
I
feelings?
just sort of lumped them in with Team Sabbat. Are they not Sabbat?
No, they're independent technically. Now I know Carrie had a Assamite anti-tribute for a long time in the game we played, but no. So they are independent and they are loyal only to the Eagle's Nest and all that good stuff.
I really don't know that much about them other than they are like the assassin in the darkness, and they actually get physically darker as they level up by like what's the word?
Diablerizing?
Yeah, diablerizing
Right. Yeah.
folks, and they're really good at being quiet and poisonous and deadly. That's pretty much the extent of my knowledge. I know nothing of their actual backstory, clan origins. Nada.
So
They're like the boogeyman that the storyteller wields against you. Like, ooh, it's an Assamite.
Right. I think that they're cool, but I just don't know, like I said, how certain things fit in larger to the story sometimes. And they're a super cool, interesting concept and like trope or whatever. But
I mean, I guess I've never seen them be an interesting trope at all, honestly. Anytime I've ever seen them, they've been acting as an assassin agent for something else that was interesting.
right.
They've never had their own plot, story, goals.
Right.
They're just an assassin in the darkness.
Well, but that serves its purpose as well. But
I would rather have them around if they had their own agenda.
that's true.
I'm sure maybe they did. I don't know.
Well, no, they very definitely
nobody
do.
ever seemed to use them that way.
They very definitely do, but we never had a game where there were enough of a presence, or the characters were trusted enough by the Assamites to be brought into the fold to understand what their agenda actually was. So they sort of were this, like you said, boogeyman assassin style character that just the players really never interacted with in a meaningful political way, I guess.
Yeah. See, I want you all in the mix or not in the mix.
Right on.
None of this hopping in and out stuff.
All right, so is there anything else specific about Vampire?
I'm sure there's lots of other
yeah.
things. It's just none of them are coming to mind right now.
So I've got one other thing, because it is, in fact, Vampire is coming out, but it is the World of Darkness.
I would like to get rid of the shunning that goes along with diablerie.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, you're terrible creatures. You're beasts, and like
Okay.
Not so much that it should be common practice because you're still on a road of humanity. And I liked the soul shards. I thought that was an interesting sort of thing.
Right.
Not necessarily actually playable in a game, but interesting nonetheless.
Right.
But I didn't like how having Diablerie veins was like something that was like, oh my goodness. Like, I feel like you looked around, probably every elder should have had those and like, whatever, no big deal.
Right, at some point.
Yeah, like...
the opportunity presented itself.
You know
well, it was
what I'm saying?
always like this forbidden thing that you weren't supposed to do,
Right, but it
but
was like
everybody was secretly
forbidden
trying to
ultimate
do.
power.
Yeah, exactly. So... if people have the opportunity to cheat on a test, chances are they're going to cheat on the test, right? If nobody's watching. If you're in a room all by yourself and no one's there,
right.
That's how it works, right? So I agree. I think it would be...
I thought it should be treated a little bit more like the whole Clan Tremere, we don't do anything against the people above us kind of thing. Like, okay, yeah, that's the rule, but...
Right. It's always interesting. It's one of those delicate things, and it's hard to figure out how to make it sort of work right, I guess. So.
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe it shouldn't be a thing at all. Maybe it just shouldn't be the thing.
Now, to be honest with you, I wouldn't have a problem with that because I like the idea of the whole sins of the father trope that we talked about in our Making Vampire Games thing, in that this is just the level that you were created at, and you will never reach higher because you can't become your grandpa. It doesn't work that way.
Mm-hmm.
This is the generation you're born at, and that's how it works, right? So I don't have a problem with that. Now,
although it does, one could argue, make sense that you would get closer in generation if you murdered your father.
Yeah, yes.
Like,
I agree.
now I'm only 7 separations, like Highlander, right?
Right.
Like,
well, and then it would fit with the Cain and Abel story too, where he murdered Abel. That
yeah,
whole
there's
process.
no soul sucking. Like, there's no need to add another level of complexity.
So I don't know. I could go either way on it. I do think it was, like you said, it was always this weird taboo but never really was portrayed perhaps as best as it could be.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I think it'll be interesting to see how it goes, but it's one of a big part of Vampire the Masquerade and always has been. So, and it continued on through Requiem and everything else. Like I mentioned before, though, it is the world of darkness, right? So is there anything that you would like to see done or changed or left the same when it comes to the way the vampire world interacts with the other supernaturals?
I don't know. I've always been the biggest fan of just vampires interacting with the mortal world.
Mm-hmm.
I never really particularly liked it when you started dragging in werewolves or mummies or wizards or ghosts or...
Right.
We have enough going on here.
Right.
We have enough going on here with just vampires and mortals. There's plenty to do there.
I don't know either. I kind of go back and forth. I like the idea because there are some stories and other games that are out there that are very cool and interesting because there is this interaction between different political factions, or I mean, like types as far as vampire and fairy and all that kind of stuff, right? But one thing I will say is that, and I have always thought, is that if you have a game where you have a vampire and a mage and a ghost and a werewolf, all of them have this cool stuff that gives them the flavor to make it a werewolf game or a vampire game. And when you have all of them there, you sort of lose that magic and it dilutes down into something that's not as good at any level.
And I always felt like when those things popped up in game, it was catering to someone's intense like of the other thing.
Right.
It had nothing to do with how it informed into the game that we were currently playing. It was just like somebody was like, oh, demons, those are really my thing. So guess what? Bali.
Right.
Or, oh, werewolves. That's what I really want to be doing. Guess what? Werewolves.
Right.
Right.
I agree.
I guess, I mean, it gives you something to rally behind, but it's there are other things that you could use in just the world that you don't need those things.
Right.
There is something I was thinking about the other day that I really would like, and we talked about how the Hunger Dice added more of a mechanic to the self-control aspect of keeping a hold of your beast. I would like to see something similarly, I guess, meaningful applied to the concept of humanity. So before, when you looked at roads in the book, it kind of breaks down like what level of sin is equated with this level of humanity.
Right.
I would like to see something a lot more like Trail of Cthulhu, where you have actual pillars of sanity. I would like you to have pillars of humanity, and those things are tested. And when you lose those things,
almost like
I want
a wraith
you,
thing,
I want you
almost,
to
like a fetter.
name them. Yeah, I want you to name them in a way that is meaningful to you, and give me an opportunity to destroy those things that are precious to you one by one, making you more monstrous.
Well,
I want humanity to matter in a real, visceral way.
Right on. I think, fetters is the best example of it because that's sort of what ties your wraith to the to the physical world, the skin lands, right? And in the same way, I could see that if you have family and things that remind you of your mortal life, this building that was my family's and I built or whatever, like if you're a wealthy real estate thing or whatever it is, right? That once those things are torn down and destroyed because of time or conflict or whatever it is, that you begin to lose your hold on your on the things that connected you to the human world. And it would make sense that as those things decline, that your humanity would slip away as well, because you don't have that connection anymore, right? And that's really...
you see this really interesting thing, like in the Anne Rice vampire world. The motivation for her vampires to make another kindred, to make a child, is so that they can stay connected to the mortal world, because as they age, they understand what is happening less and less. So they create a younger creature that allows them to sort of
connect,
re-anchor to the world and what's happening.
Interesting. That would be a really cool way to combine the two systems. I mean, and it's fetters in what we've talked about right here make perfect sense. And even if that's not in the game, I think that would be something very easily to incorporate, whether you have 10 points to spend on fetters in the same way you have them in Wraith, or you just say, give me 3 things like in Trail of Cthulhu, and these are your pillars of sanity, or pillars of humanity is what I would use, right? And these are the things that anchor you to the world. And it does a couple things. One, in Wraith and in Trail of Cthulhu, it gives things for the storyteller to attack and to put into danger so that you have to react to them. And part of that risk is, do I continue on my vampire path and my vampire goals, or and let this piece of humanity go and die and break and be murdered or whatever it is?
I like the idea of establishing your own ideals like they do with the Pillars of Sanity. So now I'm not saying, okay, well, murder is number 6, murder of a child is number 4,
right,
or, whatever preset thing. I can say, okay, well, to me, part of my humanity is these 3 or 4 things are the things that I would consider grave sins against another human. And so those are going to be my pillars of humanity. They're probably similar to a lot of other people's around the table, but they're not going to be identical.
Right. Well, then something else you could do, in terms of the way it used to work, at least for ours, and if I'm remembering things correctly, because it's been a long time since I've read a lot of the minutia of Masquerade, right? But most of your vampires seem to come at an operating level of between 5 and 6 once they actually became full vampires and had some influence and had some time under their belt, right? So maybe if you have 4 pillars of humanity, right? Once you lose each of those, that's the max that you can be at no matter what, because largely speaking, really terrible acts of murder and torture are your level of sin at 1 to 4, 1 to 5, right? So once you've lost this connection to the real world, it isn't even necessarily about what you've physically done. It's just a matter of, like what you said in the Anne Rice way, you just lose that connection. You just don't feel it anymore because it's not there. Those things are gone. It's not relevant to you, right?
And that's the concept of torpor exists in that too. Like at some point you're so disconnected and you're like, I'm just going to take a break.
That's a wicked cool idea.
Go to sleep for 200 years.
Well, and then think of it this way. If most of your vampires, when you make them the way it said, it was you could have been alive, or been a vampire for up to 50 years, right? So let's say that you're a 30-year-old person and then you get embraced a vampire, and we go back 80 years, okay? So 80 years from now is, 2018, so just to make it easy, 2020, you're looking at 1940. How different is the world from 1940 to now? And imagine if your grandparents or whoever, people that are at that age, they didn't physically age any, so they look the same. And also they don't necessarily, as we get older, our mental faculties aren't as sharp. We're not as fast and all that kind of stuff because we get old and that's how it works. What if that never changed? So all the grudges and the prejudices of the past that you had and just the way you saw doing things, right? You think people are a Luddite now because they want to use a flip phone instead of a smartphone, right? Well, what if you're from 1940? What if you were a Luddite in 1940 and you thought, oh, we shouldn't be driving around in cars nowadays, and now here we are today, right? How connected are you to this world? Like, not at all, right? It's like not even the same world almost, right? Just insane to think that. So I guess it's just to, it's totally relevant that you would lose that connection more by time happening than physically doing. I think if you do terrible things, obviously it's going to have an effect on you. But if you even, no matter how much you work to not do terrible things, as time goes by and age slips on, you're just going to lose that connection. I think it's a super cool idea. I think we'll probably use that in our games from now on, actually. That's really cool. I love it. Okay, so I guess the last thing to follow up on is Vampire was made in the 90s, right?
Yep.
And we didn't have the TSA and all the surveillance and interwebs and all that kind of stuff that we have now. And everybody's got a camera in their pocket with their cell phone and access to all the information in the world right in their pocket, right? So how do you think that that should affect Vampire? Because this V5 is bringing Vampire into the modern age. So how do you think that Vampire should be dealing with that kind of technology? And how should it affect the Masquerade? And
I really think that that is only a problem for the 90s and 2000s era. Because now anybody and everybody can say, "Oh, well, you doctored that video. That's photoshopped. It's CGI. It's this." People will find a way to disbelieve themselves out of the disbelievable.
Right. Flat Earth being right. Yeah.
Right. Like.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think it's pretty easy to debunk. But now I think it makes for a much more interesting mortal world. And to me, I would use that instead of now your Asimite in the darkness. Okay, but now you have the Department of Homeland Security that's investigating what you've got going on here. And while everybody else, maybe they doctored this story so it looks like it was leaked, or your influence in the world the media is now like, oh, well, that was fake news. New information has come to light.
Right.
You know, that video was doctored and this and that. And that's easy to whisk away. But now you have these government organizations that are like, well,
yeah. So if you're
almost
a monstrous
like a
vampire,
Men in Black sort of,
right?
But like darker.
If you're a monstrous vampire doing terrible things, it's going to be that much easier to track you down and find you because.
And I guess what we just created there was Night's Black Agents.
Night's Black Agents.
So.
True story.
Sorry.
True story.
Sorry about that.
We did another Ken Hite book or game, right? So no, it's totally relevant and it makes sense. And I've always liked Death by Pitchfork, and Death by Pitchfork in Dark Ages is very relevant because you can't just get in a jet and fly away, right?
Death by heat-seeking missile.
Now it's even more relevant, yeah. So
you're cold, so I don't know how that's gonna.
Well, but
you get what I'm saying.
Heat-seeking missile though could very easily be the signal in your cell phone.
Right.
And that's with drones bombing places overseas and everything. It's totally relevant. It's exactly how it works almost. And I think that it makes mortals relevant in a way that they really weren't before in the 90s. It was just sort of like, oh,
how dare you, sir?
They're sort of schmucks and whatever, and we'll just outsmart them and we've got more power and influence and who cares? Until hunters really got involved, it wasn't a threat of anything, right? Now, in terms of vampires using modern technology, do you think that there's any cool opportunities there or things that you would like to see?
Oh, absolutely. I would love like kind of a hive mind sort of techie. What's the movie? Blade, right? And then there's like the weird vampire and all the TV screens and everything.
Oh, yeah.
And he's all like hooked into the system. To me, that is Clan Nosferatu in the future.
Oh, you're right, 100%. Because if they're still going to be the information dealers they sort of have to diversify and plug into new areas to figure things out. There was one of the clan books. I think it was like Broodhen or something like that, or the Technocrat. I can't remember what it was called, but there was a Nosferatu style of character to make, kind of like Cleopatra or whatever, that was more of a tech-savvy style Nosferatu, and that's what they did. And they had this sort of network of information sharing that was more at a tech level as opposed to just talking to one another. Totally relevant. I think you're right. And Nosferatu sort of would naturally segue into that because that's that world, right? I don't know. Do you have any last things here to finish up with about hopes or for things that exist or don't exist in V5?
No, I think I'm all tapped out for
all
now.
Vampired out. Right on. So I am super looking forward to it. I'm excited for Vampire. Made me even more excited for Gen Con to hopefully get my hands on it at the release at Gen Con this year. So I'm very excited, and hopefully I have high hopes, and I don't think I will be let down because everything that I've seen so far is very awesome. Right on. Well, if you guys have any thoughts about what you would like to see more of or less of, or changes that you just think would be interesting to see in Vampire as it's coming out and the preview that's hopefully coming out, I believe the end of this week, let us know. You can hit us up on Twitter or in our Facebook group, or you can email me, James at Just More Fix. We'll give you a shout out here, and maybe we can find some new Vampire ideas to mine and take a look at and see what else we can figure out. As you guys know, we are a member of the Gonna Geek Network, so a quick plug for our Operation Pug Podcast, episode 80, the E3 2018 cast. E3 came and went, and the Pugcast crew are back to bring you the roundup, as well as we address toxic fandom in Star Wars and review the delightful book Space Opera by Catherine M. Valente. I think that's Valente. So you can check them out on the Gonna Geek Network. That's Operation Pug Podcast, episode 60. Like I said, if you guys have any speculation or awesome things that you're hoping to see for them in V5, drop us a line, let us know. Otherwise, we will see you guys next week. Thanks for listening. This has been an episode of Just One More Fix. Music has been provided by Kevin MacLeod. You can find him at Incompetech.com. You can support us at Patreon.com/JustOneMoreFix or follow us on Twitter at Just One More Fix.